the median 55-year-old in America has $185,000 saved for retirement. The number Americans say they need to retire comfortably in 2026 is 1.46 million. That's not a gap. That's an 8-to-1 ratio between what people have and what they think they need. And it gets worse because that $185,000 number, it is a median, which means half of all 55-year-olds in this country have less. And we haven't even talked about what that money actually buys you yet. Here's what I'm going to show you today. Not just the savings numbers, because you can Google those. I'm going to show you why the savings numbers are even more broken than they look on the surface. I'm going to show you why the plan most people have built, the one where they keep working until 67 and let the 401k compound, has about a 56% chance of being taken from them by someone else first. And then I'm going to show you what the actual financial floor looks like when you run the real numbers. Healthcare, Social Security math, withdrawal math, all of it. And why the standard playbook that financial advisors have been selling for 30 years does not survive contact with reality. This is the retirement picture in 2026. And it is genuinely alarming. Not in a clickbait way, in a spreadsheet way. So here's the metaphor I want to use throughout this video, because it will keep coming back. Retirement planning in America is like watching a basketball game and only checking the scoreboard. The score is going up. You're adding to the 401k every year. The balance is higher than it was last year. You feel like you're winning. The problem is nobody is watching the clock. Nobody is tracking how much time is left in the game, how fast the other team is scoring, or what happens if the buzzer goes off 10 years early. The scoreboard feels good. The clock is the part that kills you. Let me start with the part that is even more broken than you think, because this will make everything that comes after it land harder. The number you hear most often about retirement savings at 55 is the average. And the average for Americans aged 55 to 64, according to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, is $537,560. That sounds almost okay. A little low, maybe, but workable. The problem is that $537,000 is the average. The median, the number that represents the person exactly in the middle of the entire distribution, is $185,000. That is not a rounding error. That is a 200% gap between the average and the median. And it exists because of one thing: extreme wealth concentration at the top of the distribution. Think about it this way. You have a room with 10 people. 9 of them have roughly $200,000 saved. One of them has $2 million. The average in that room is $380,000. Nobody in the room actually has $380,000. The average is not lying to you exactly. It's just describing a reality that doesn't apply to 9 of the 10 people standing in front of you. That is the American retirement savings picture. A small number of executives with million-dollar-plus balances pulling the mean so far above what typical Americans actually have that the average number becomes almost useless as a planning benchmark. This is where it gets really interesting. The Vanguard data, which comes from 5 million actual 401k participants, shows that the median 401k balance for workers aged 55 to 64 is $84,700. Not $185,000, $84,700. That lower number is only 401k. The 185,000 figure includes all retirement accounts, IRA, pension, everything. But the point stands. At the 90th percentile for this age group, the 401k balance is $904,200. That is more than 10 times the median. A small group at the top is so far ahead that their numbers make the overall average feel reassuring when it absolutely should not be. So the first thing you need to do before you look at any other number in this video is throw out the average. The scoreboard that shows $537,000 is not your scoreboard. Your scoreboard is more likely showing $185,000 or below. And that is the number we need to run through the actual retirement math. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you something about the timing of market returns that has nothing to do with how much you save and everything to do with whether your money lasts. But first, let me show you just how far behind that $185,000 number actually is. Fidelity, which manages retirement accounts for about 45 million Americans, has a benchmark system. By age 55, they say you should have 6 times your annual salary saved. Let's use the median US household income, which is roughly $65,000 per year. 6 times $65,000 is $390,000. The median 55-year-old has $185,000. They are sitting at 47% of where Fidelity's benchmark says they should be, not 90%, not 80%, 47%. Now pull out the 4% rule. The rule that says you can safely withdraw 4% of your portfolio per year in retirement without running out of money over 30 years. 4% of $185,000 is $7,400 per year. That is $616 per month from your savings. Add the average Social Security check in 2026, which is about $2,081 per month. Your total monthly retirement income is $2,697 before tax, before healthcare, before anything. And here's where the clock becomes visible for the first time. You are 55. Medicare does not start until 65. That is a 10-year healthcare gap. And in 2026, because the enhanced ACA premium tax credits that kept marketplace premiums lower from 2021 through 2025 expired at the end of last year and were not renewed, a 62-year-old buying an individual marketplace plan pays full price if their income exceeds roughly $62,600. Full price at that age under a benchmark silver plan is approximately $1,100 to $1,500 per month per person. A couple in their early 60s, both retiring at the same time, looking at marketplace coverage, could be facing $34,000, $188 per year in health insurance premiums alone. And that's before deductibles, before copays, before prescriptions. According to a 2026 report by the Employee Benefit Research Institute, a couple with median drug expenses needs $267,000 in savings just to have a 50% chance of covering healthcare costs in retirement. To have a 90% chance, they need $405,000 just for healthcare. The scoreboard says $185,000. The healthcare line item alone, at 90% confidence, costs $405,000. The scoreboard was lying the whole time. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content, otherwise YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Let me introduce you to Marcus. He's 55, works in middle management at a manufacturing company, has been reasonably responsible with money his whole life. $190,000 in his 401k. That's slightly above the national median, so Marcus feels okay. Not great, but okay. He watches his balance go up every year. The scoreboard makes him feel like the game is going fine. What Marcus doesn't know yet is that his company just got acquired by a private equity firm. This is a subplot I want to keep returning to because Marcus is not a character I invented for dramatic effect. Marcus is the statistical average of what is about to happen to about half the workforce in his age group. We'll come back to him. Here is the part that every mainstream financial conversation leaves out. And I want you to sit with this number for a second before I explain what causes it. According to research by the Urban Institute and ProPublica, 56% of workers over the age of 50 in long-term, full-time positions lost their jobs involuntarily before they ever reached retirement. More than half. Not a fringe case. The dominant pattern: layoffs, corporate restructuring, health issues, forced early retirement packages with an implied ultimatum. The number of recent retirees who said their retirement was forced or partially forced grew from 33% in 1998 to 55% in 2014, and there's no evidence the trend reversed. The retirement plan that millions of Americans built assumes they keep working until 67, keep contributing, and let compounding close the gap. The data says more than half of them will not get that option. And when the job goes, the recovery is brutal. Among workers over 50 who lost their jobs involuntarily, only 1 in 10 ever returned to the same level of pay again. The Urban Institute found that median household income dropped 42% after an involuntary job loss at this age from $93,710 down to $54,810. Think about what that does to retirement savings contributions. You were planning to max out your 401k for the next 12 years. Now you are scrambling to replace income at a 50% haircut, competing against applicants 20 years younger in a job market where nearly 45% of unemployed workers over 55 spend at least 27 weeks looking for a new job before finding anything. Marcus's company gets acquired. The new private equity owners cut a layer of management. Marcus is 57. He gets a severance package. He never goes back to the salary he had. The scoreboard freezes at $210,000. The clock keeps running. The problem most people think they have at 55 is not saving enough. That's real. But the deeper problem, the one that compounds the saving shortfall, is that the timeline they're counting on to fix the saving shortfall is the same timeline that has more than a 50% chance of being cut in, half by someone else. You can't solve a savings problem if someone else controls how long you get to save. And there's a third clock, one that most people know about in theory but don't take seriously in practice: Social Security. The average Social Security retirement check in 2026 is about $2,081 per month. That sounds like a floor you can stand on. But Social Security was designed to replace approximately 40% of your pre-retirement income. Not 70%, not 80%, 40%. And the trust fund, according to the Congressional Budget Office, is on track to be depleted by 2032. At that point, under current law, recipients would receive about 72% of their scheduled benefits. The Social Security trustees report projects 2033 as the insolvency date, with a 23% reduction. Either way, the check you're counting on in your mid-60s could get cut by roughly a quarter, right when you need it most. Here is the part that quietly destroys the retirement math for most people. Claiming Social Security at 62 versus waiting until 70 creates a 76% permanent difference in your monthly benefit for life. If your full retirement age benefit would be $2,000 per month, claiming at 62 gets you $1,400 per month. Waiting until 70 gets you $2,480 every month forever. That's a difference of $12,960 per year, compounding across the remaining years of your life. And yet only 4% of Americans wait until 70 to claim. 4%. The math says delay. The human psychology says take the money now. And the psychology usually wins, especially when you are forced out of work at 57 and you've been burning through savings for 5 years and the bill keeps coming. Now here is the thing I want to highlight that goes deeper than just the savings number and the Social Security timing. I want to talk about what actually destroys retirement portfolios, even when people do manage to save enough. The standard advice: max your 401k, invest in index funds, follow the 4% rule. Makes sense if you run it on 30 years of clean historical averages, but it breaks in one specific and extremely common scenario. Morningstar published research in December 2025, the State of Retirement Income Report, and found something that should be required reading for anyone within 10 years of retirement. The highest safe withdrawal rate for someone retiring in 2026 with a 30-year horizon and a 90% probability of success is 3.9%, not 4%. 3.9 on $1 million. That's $39,000 per year, not $40,000. Small difference, you might say. But that same research found that of all retirement portfolios that failed, that ran out of money, nearly 70% failed, not because of poor long-term average returns, but because they experienced significant losses in the first 5 years of retirement, while withdrawals were happening simultaneously. Think about what that means. 2 people retire with $1 million each. Same long-term average return, 7% per year over 30 years. The only difference is the sequence. The first person gets strong market years in years 1 through 5, then hits the downturns in years 15 and 20. The second person hits the downturns in years 1 through 3, while they're also pulling out $40,000 per year. The first person dies wealthy. The second person runs out of money at year 22. Same amount saved, same average return, different order. That is sequence of returns risk. And it is the reason the 4% rule, invented in the 90s, when bond yields were higher and inflation averaged 2%, is now being reassessed by every serious researcher in this field. The scoreboard showed $1 million when both of them retired. The clock specifically, the timing of bad years, is what determined everything. Here's the part that is genuinely worth pausing on for a second. The 4% rule assumes a 50-50 split between stocks and bonds. It was designed for a 30-year retirement. If you retire at 60, your retirement could last 35 or 40 years. According to actuarial data, a couple, both retiring at 60, has a 64% chance of at least one spouse still being alive at age 90. If you are retiring at 55 because Marcus's situation happened to you, your money needs to last potentially 40 years, not 30. The math doesn't get less complicated. Here is where knowing these numbers and actually building a plan around them are two very different things. I spent the better part of the last 2 years pulling together 50 years of retirement data. Not opinion, not podcast takes, not my financial advisor told me, actual data. Vanguard research, Federal Reserve surveys, EBRI reports, Morningstar withdrawal studies, Social Security actuarial tables. And I distilled it into a framework I call the Exit Code. It's a digital book, 8 chapters of pure research, no filler. And I built it specifically around the problems we've been talking about in this video. One of the things I cover in detail is what I call the $14,000 invisible bill, the healthcare gap that most early retirees never model correctly, especially now that the enhanced ACA subsidies expired at the end of 2025. That is a real, calculable number that destroys retirement budgets for people who leave work before 65. And it's essentially invisible in standard retirement planning conversations. I also break down the 58% rule, the statistical likelihood that your planned retirement timeline gets cut short by involuntary forces, and the specific buffer you need to build to survive that scenario financially, including what it does to your Social Security strategy. The pricing is less than one dinner out through the link in the description below. If you're in your 40s or 50s and you've been building a retirement plan on assumptions that haven't been stress tested against the actual data, this is the research that does that stress test for you. Now, let's go back to Marcus and let's run his actual numbers, because this is where the story moves from alarming to actionable. Marcus is 55. He has $190,000 saved. He earns $65,000 per year. Let's say he keeps his job. Best case scenario, he works until 67. He contributes to his 401k for the next 12 years, maxing the catch-up contribution because he's over 50. That's $32,500 per year. With a 7% annual return, his balance at 67 would be approximately $728,000. That's real, that's meaningful, and it requires 12 continuous years of maximum contributions without a single job disruption. Now apply the 3.9% withdrawal rate from the Morningstar research. On $728,000, that is $28,392 per year from the portfolio. At Social Security at full retirement age, let's say Marcus's benefit is approximately $2,300 per month, which is $27,600 per year. Total annual retirement income, $55,992. Pre-tax, before healthcare. Because even on Medicare at 67, he's paying premiums and out-of-pocket costs. According to Fidelity's most recent data, a 65-year-old retiring in 2025 should expect to spend $172,500 on healthcare over the course of their retirement. That's a cost running in the background of every single retirement year. Now run the scenario where Marcus loses his job at 57, which is statistically more likely than not. He stops contributing at $190,000. His balance compounds for 10 years without contributions. At 67, it might be around $364,000. His Social Security, because he stopped working and filed earlier, under financial pressure, comes in at maybe $1,700 per month, $20,400 per year. Total income, roughly $35,000 per year. His healthcare alone, from 57 to 65, 8 years, without Medicare, at roughly $13,000 per year in premiums alone, costs him $104,000 from the same nest egg that was supposed to last 30 years. The scoreboard at 55 showed $190,000. The clock handed him a bill for $104,000 before he could even get to the main game. Most people, when they look at these numbers for the first time, conclude that the solution is to save more. And that's not wrong. But here's the reversal that actually matters. You think the problem is how much you've saved. The real problem is the plan you've built around assumptions that were never realistic to begin with, specifically the assumption that you control the timing. The Forbes and Kiplinger articles that tell you to max your 401k and wait until 65 are not lying to you. They're just describing the optimal strategy for a scenario that more than half of you will never get to live out. Optimizing for a scenario you have a 56% chance of never reaching is a very specific kind of financial planning mistake. The primary fix is not contribution rate. The primary fix is stress testing the plan against a forced exit at 57, not a voluntary exit at 67. Here's a brief interlude on what most financial advisors actually do in this situation. They run a Monte Carlo simulation to model retirement success. They show you a bar that says you have an 82% probability of success based on your current savings rate. You leave the meeting feeling okay. Then they charge you 1% of your assets every year to continue showing you that bar. On a $200,000 portfolio, that's $2,000 per year. Over 30 years with compounding, that fee on a $200,000 starting balance costs you approximately $170,000 in lost returns. The advice is not necessarily wrong. The incentive to keep it simple and keep you invested and keep you as a client is just structurally in tension with telling you the hard truths about the clock. This is not a conspiracy. It's just incentives. The advisor gets paid whether or not you build a healthcare bridge strategy. They get paid whether or not you model the forced retirement scenario. The uncomfortable math doesn't generate referrals the way the comfortable bar does. You think you hired someone to protect you from the clock. You actually hired someone whose business model runs better when you don't look at it. And this brings us to the deepest layer of the problem, which is not financial at all. It is behavioral. A study published by the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis found that the middle 70% of households by income aged 50 to 65, we have a median retirement account balance of $86,000, but a median debt of $89,700. More debt than savings right on the doorstep of retirement. Not because people are stupid, because the human brain is terrible at making trade-offs between present discomfort and future benefit, especially when the future benefit is 30 years away and the present discomfort is a car payment that exists right now. The psychology of money, not the math of money, is why only 14% of Americans maxed their 401k last year. Why 64% of Americans worry more about outliving their savings than dying, but only 4% actually take the Social Security strategy that mathematically helps them avoid it. Why 92% of current retirees say people underestimate how much they need, and then the same generation of people about to retire underestimates exactly the same way. There's a study from Carey.com that sums it up cleanly. 64% of Americans worry more about running out of savings than about death. And yet 51% of retirees when surveyed say they have no plan for what they would do if their savings ran out. That is not a math gap. That is a cognitive gap. People hold the fear and the denial simultaneously. They know the problem is real, and they also refuse to look directly at it. The scoreboard feels too good to turn off. Here's one of my favorite pieces of absurdist financial data before we get to the practical takeaways. A clever real estate survey published earlier this year found that 43% of retirees say they would prefer to die than have their savings run out. 43%. Not, I would be extremely stressed. Not, I would downsize and adapt. 43% said they would rather not be alive than deal with the financial consequences. That's not a retirement crisis. That is a retirement existential crisis. And it's running in the background of basically every conversation about money that people in their 50s are having. Here's another one. $2.1 trillion is sitting idle in forgotten 401k accounts people left behind when they changed jobs, never rolled over, never found again. The average forgotten balance, $66,691. There are people stressed about their retirement savings, while they have an entire additional account they've simply lost track of. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And I mean that literally. Vanguard's data shows that between 2022 and 2025, people who stayed invested in a basic stock-heavy 401k allocation kept contributing and rebalanced annually ended up with $191,463 from a $100,000 starting balance. The people who panicked, sold out of stocks, and stopped contributing ended up with $105,586. The market gave both of them the same environment. Panic cost the second person $86,000. No exotic strategy, no hedging, no timing the bottom, just not doing the panicky human thing when the scoreboard went negative. The problem was never the returns. The problem was the behavior. So here are 3 practical takeaways that are actually specific to what we've been talking about, not generic advice you've heard 100 times. First, stop comparing your retirement savings to the national average. The average is meaningless because it's pulled upward by a small group of people who will never share their money with you. Compare instead to the median $185,000 for your age group. And then, against the Fidelity salary, multiple benchmark. 6 times your annual income by 55, 8 times by 60. If your number is not there, that is not a reason to panic. That is a calibration point that tells you specifically how large the gap is, so you can build a realistic plan around the actual distance, not a comfortable illusion. Second, today, this week, before you do anything else with this information, model the forced early retirement scenario. Assume someone takes the ball at 57, not 62, not 65, 57. Run the math forward from that point. What is your healthcare cost from 57 to 65? What does your Social Security check look like if you claim at 62 out of necessity versus waiting until 70? What does 4% of your current balance actually yield in annual income? If that scenario works financially, great. You've stress tested the plan and you can relax. If it doesn't, you now know exactly which number you need to move to make it work. The gap you quantify is the gap you can close. The gap you ignore is the one that catches you at 59 on a Tuesday after a meeting with HR. Third, price out your healthcare bridge before you price out anything else. Not a rough estimate, an actual quote. Go to healthcare.gov and run your age, income, and family size through the current marketplace calculator. That number, your pre-Medicare annual healthcare premium, comes off the top of your retirement income before you count anything else. For most people, retiring before 65, it is the single largest line item in their budget and also the one they are most likely to have set to 0 in their planning spreadsheet. The enhanced ACA subsidies that made this math easier are gone as of 2026. The number is real. It belongs in the model. The retirement system in America was not designed to fail you. It was designed for a world that assumed full-time employment through 65 defined benefit pensions, Medicare from day one of retirement, and a Social Security trust fund that stays solvent forever. 3 of those 4 assumptions are no longer reliably true. The system didn't break. The world changed around it while the playbook stayed the same. The scoreboard went up every year, and nobody updated the clock. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And if you're still building a retirement plan that doesn't account for the clock, you're not being strategic. You're just watching the wrong number. The median American aged 55 to 64 has $185,000 in retirement savings. The magic number Americans believe they need to retire comfortably in 2026 is $1.46,200,000 more than the figure from 2025 and still far beyond what most people have saved. Roughly 28% of Americans have nothing saved at all. The average 401k balance for Americans aged 55 to 64 is $272,600, but the median, representing the typical worker, is just $84,700. These gaps reflect extreme wealth concentration, with a small number of workers with million-dollar balances pulling the average far above what most people actually have saved. At ages 55 to 64, the 90th percentile 401k balance is $904,200 more than 10 times the median. Fidelity recommends having 1 times your salary by 30, 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50, and 10 times by 67 as benchmark multiples for retirement readiness. The average Social Security retirement benefit in 2026 is approximately $1,976 per month after the 2.5% COLA adjustment. Social Security is only designed to replace approximately 40% of your pre-retirement paycheck. At the end of 2025, the enhanced premium tax credits that had lowered ACA premiums since 2021 expired and were not renewed for 2026. For early retirees, this means the subsidy cliff at 400% of the federal poverty level is back. So anyone earning above roughly $62,600 as a single person pays full price for marketplace coverage, which can exceed $1,500 per month at age 62 in some rating areas. A married couple with one spouse at 62 and one at 63 could face a combined full-price silver benchmark premium of around $2,849 per month before premium tax credits, approximately $34,188 per year before deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance, and prescriptions. According to the EBRI report, to have a 90% chance of meeting healthcare spending needs in retirement, a man will need to have saved $212,000 and a woman $252,000. Couples enrolled in a Medigap plan with average premiums will need to have saved $267,000 for a 50% chance and $405,000 for a 90% chance. In total, 56% of workers over the age of 50 in long-term full-time positions lost their jobs involuntarily. More than half of all workers age 50 and older lost their long-held jobs because they were laid off or otherwise forced to leave involuntarily. The research suggests that many older workers will encounter unexpected financial setbacks during the period when saving and planning for retirement is most important. The Urban Institute found that only 1 in 10 older workers who involuntarily lost their jobs ever returned to the same level of pay again. Overall, these households saw median income plummet 42%, from $93,710 to $54,810. Morningstar released their State of Retirement Income 2025 report in December 2025. For someone retiring in 2026, the highest safe withdrawal rate for a stable inflation-adjusted paycheck over 30 years is 3.9%. That means if you have $1 million in your portfolio, you can safely withdraw about $39,000 per year, and that still has a 10% chance of failure. Morningstar found that of the retirement plans that failed, nearly 70% failed because they experienced losses in the first 5 years. Once income starts coming out of a shrinking portfolio, the damage compounds over decades. Claiming Social Security at 70 instead of 62 increases your monthly benefit by approximately 76%. For someone with a $2,000 full retirement age benefit, that's the difference between $1,400 per month and $2,480 per month for life. Only about 4% of Americans wait until they're 70 to claim the maximum Social Security benefit, according to a recent study from the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies. According to analysts at the Congressional Budget Office, without congressional action, the Social Security Trust Fund will be depleted in 2032. At that point, recipients would only be able to receive 72% of their full benefits. Fidelity's latest retirement analysis shows the power of staying the course. In the period from 2022 to 2025, savers who started with $100,000 in their 401k stayed invested in stocks, kept contributing, and rebalance annually ended up with $191,463 at the end of the period. In contrast, a saver who got completely out of stocks and stopped contributing would have had a balance of just $105,586. According to Vanguard's How America Saves 2025 report, only 14% of participants contributed the annual maximum to their 401k. Almost two-thirds of American retirees, 64%, say the United States is in a retirement crisis. And only 41% believe retirement will be possible for the typical American in 25 years. A majority of retirees, 51%, say they have no plan if their retirement savings run out. 64% of Americans worry more about running out of savings than about death, according to the 2025 Allianz annual retirement study, and 43% say Social Security will fall short. A recent study found that $2.1 trillion is sitting idle in 401k accounts with an average balance of $66,691, as savers have lost track of these accounts due to job changes, rollovers, or lack of portability.